Hello, welcome to Sex Talk with Natasha. It's Wednesday night, 10 p.m. Got another great topic. We've got a topic about being transgender female and how do I date? How do I have sex? How do I go about my new life in that regard after transitioning? So this is a really great topic and I'm very excited to talk about it from different perspectives. But before we do that, I just want to give a shout out to all the subscribers. Thanks for subscribing to Sex Talk with Natasha. Slowly but surely, we're becoming a larger community. And as we're doing that, I see more conversations and more comments, and it's just becoming a rich community that I'm really enjoying interacting with on the Patreon page, which one of the benefits of subscribing is you have direct access to me through email, through the community page where you can ask me questions throughout the week, and I'm happy to interact with you. So that's one of the benefits of becoming a subscriber, as well as lots of other resources. And I'm always a big proponent of seeing our sexuality as an entity and a part of our lives that should be considered part of our wellness, our health plan, etc. So it's intertwined with our self-esteem, with our emotional health, with our physical health. And so something that I hope that you're in agreement with me that should be prioritized. And also please don't, transgender folks are about, I'll get into this, it's about 3 to 6% of the population. So I know there's not necessarily a lot of you out there who will be listening in from a personal perspective. At the same time, I think this is an area that all of us need so much more education on, and especially need to face a lot of the biases and discriminations that transgender folks are having to face on a regular basis. So I really, really encourage you to listen, even if you feel like it's maybe not going to be as personally applicable to you tonight. Plus, there's always threads, regardless of what the topic is, that end up being applicable, because after all, we are all human and we're all negotiating similar things, even when there's nuances such as being transgender. So Ashley, take it away as far as introducing the show and letting us know what we can expect, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, welcome everybody. We're really excited to be here tonight. And again, great topic. We're excited to kind of delve into this. For those that are just joining, the program is an hour long. The first 20 minutes, Natasha's going to lecture and tell us some research and tell us what she wants to teach us about the topic. And then for about 20 minutes after that, our guest is going to come on and she will share her experience, and her and Natasha will kind of converse back and forth. And then the last 20 minutes, we really want to get to your questions. So go ahead and send us your questions, whether it's through Facebook, Patreon for our patrons. We have email, sextalkwithnatasha@gmail.com. Send us your questions. We definitely will get to them. And the first half is free on Facebook through Natasha's personal page. We also share it to our page, our Sex Talk with Natasha page, so you can check it out there too. And then the last, we'll cut it off at around 30 minutes, but the full episode is on Patreon. And so you can go and become a subscriber, patreon.com/sextalkwithnatasha. And there you'll get the full episode along with lots of resources. And it's a great place, like Natasha said, to interact with the community. Lots of, like Natasha does, actions to combat sexual shame. It's just lots of resources. So please go check it out. If anybody does want to see Natasha professionally, you can check her out on her online practice. It's called Symmetry Solutions. My mouth is a little dry tonight. Symmetry Solutions. There's lots of S's in that. Symmetry Solutions. And you can find that at symmetrysouls.com. So go check that out. She also has some great providers that she works with over there. And so if you're looking for professional help, you can find it there. So I'll turn it back over to Natasha.
Thanks, Ashley. It is a bit of a tongue twister.
It's fun.
Alley, seashore, seashells. Taking me back to those days. Yeah, and another thing that I just want to talk about really quickly that I do every single time I hold one of these Facebook Lives, I go back and re-listen to it because either I or the guest talks about resources or things that I mention, etc. So I come up with a post for subscribers that lists all the different things. And even as I'm listening to it, sometimes I'm jarred to think about other potential resources. And so I'll put those all in a nice document where you can link to lots of different things. Plus I give homework assignments and just kind of bullet point all the different information that was covered. So it's a nice kind of like written format of our session tonight. So that's just another benefit. Okay, so I'm actually going to start today. This is really our first time at Sex Talk with Natasha addressing the transgender population. And so I'm actually going to start some of my bulleted points, just offering some basic information for the general public. So not necessarily addressing the guest question, which we'll have plenty of time to get to. But the reality is that we currently live in a world here in the United States that is extremely antagonistic towards transgender folks. I mean, I'm always, I guess, a little bit surprised at the level of antagonism. I mean, I know that we tend to be creatures that otherize other people, you know, the us versus them, and some of that is fairly normal. We all kind of do that in different ways, whether it's politics or religion or family cultures or race or ethnicities. But this is, it always kind of takes a little bit of my breath away when I see the level, the types of comments that are made, the insensitivity, and of course, just even from a political standpoint, some of the issues that we've seen with, you know, the use of restrooms, the unfortunate issues that are happening in the military. It's just mind-boggling to me, and it's just so painful. And so I think it's really important for all of us to understand the level of bias and stigma that transgender folks are up against. And when you look at the statistics, they're really staggering as far as the levels of violence. For example, I should have looked at it, but I think it's like 5 to 10 times more chance of having violence committed against you if you're a transgender person. And that's also inclusive in intimate partnerships. There's a much higher likelihood of having violence in an intimate partner relationship if you're transgender. And also the levels of suicide are much greater, which is quite frankly understandable because it's so hard to navigate as a transgender person in our community. So this is one of the kind of areas, social justice areas, where we're really just starting the pioneering process. And it's so unfortunate. It's, you know, historically, like, for example, I have one of my providers, actually, Kimberly Anderson, works for I think she does groups out in California where she's geographically located. And it's the Native American groups, and it's called a Two-Spirit group. You know, so there are cultures historically that actually see transgender folks as kind of unique, special, not that people necessarily want to be special either, but kind of with an honor and a respect that is severely lacking in the United States current sexual culture. So I just want to point that out. So when you take that into, of course, dating, I just want to, you know, because our guest is, of course, in that space where they're going to be dating and finding new people to be with, I just want to really validate the difficulties. I think I read a study somewhere where 16 to 18% of Americans say that they would be willing to date a transgender individual. So most people complain about dating to begin with. Most people don't find it to be the easiest process. Most people have a hard time, you know, finding people to connect with. And so it's, imagine if that, whatever that pool is cut by, you know, like 80%. It's really pretty tragic and unfortunate and unnecessary. And so therefore, I think that this topic requires a lot of education. And for those of us who are cisgender, which, by the way, these are the terms, right? So a lot of people don't even know they're cisgender because we have cisgender privilege. But cisgender means that your gender identity matches the sex that you were assigned by birth. And what I just said is a lot of language that I've been trained about. So a lot of us just think of ourselves as, I'm a woman, I'm a man. All of us were assigned a sex at birth. And for some people, you know, that's based on your biology. That's based on your anatomy. Does the human have a penis, or does the human have a vulva and vagina? And for a certain level of the population, that's, you can't really tell. So this is intersex population. But we tend to live in a culture where we have very little ability to tolerate that anxiety. So we assign people regardless. And there's a lot of problems that have come from that. So that's very different from such your biological sex. And that's very different from your gender identity, which is more your the psychological way that you either identify as having feminine traits, masculine traits, et cetera, as the culture defines it. Because again, gender is very culturally driven. You know, what does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to present as a woman? These are all issues that we could talk all day about. And I've gone to many conferences and presentations where we are talking all day about how complex these issues are. And again, in our culture, we tend to be very binary, either you're this or you're that. And as soon as anybody's challenging those norms, people get extremely threatened and upset to the point that they can justify violence and really horrific discriminatory comments, which especially hurt when I feel like they come from a religious background, because I just don't know how we can justify religious discrimination because of this issue. So that's my soapbox on all of that. But I am a cisgender woman. I'm going to be talking to a transgender woman, which when you say transgender woman, that means that person was assigned male at birth and now identifies as woman. So I know that there's some confusion sometimes on how to use the language, but that's some basic 101 things. All right, so my number 2 point then is that there are a lot of reasons why certain people may start dating or having sexual experiences later than what might be considered the developmental norm. So whether maybe somebody is gay or has a disability or maybe is ultra religious or whatever, a lot of times I'll get people kind of in their mid-20s or early 30s that have not had sexual experiences and that are transitioning or wanting to have sexual experiences, but because they're kind of behind the curve as far as, their peers, maybe all started at a much earlier age experimenting with these things, that can be even one more hurdle. Because not only now do I have the normal hurdles of all the inadequacies we all feel when we're starting to become sexual and figuring out who we are as a sexual identity, but now on top of it, you feel like you're not quite caught up with your peers. So that can be a very difficult psychological hurdle to face as well. So I just want to kind of validate that as well. Number 3 point that I think is an issue for transgender folks as they begin to date is that they are, of course, presenting differently, usually from a gender expression perspective than they have before. So again, what does it mean to be female? Well, you might have longer hair, you might wear lace or frills, right? What does it mean to present as male? You might have a beard now or have these markers as far as how we can tell in our culture that, again, you're either this or you're that. So what tends to happen is that there's a lot of really inappropriate curiosity about the body. So when folks present as transgender, people have questions like, well, so does that mean that your genitals, have you had surgery on your genitals, or are those breasts that you have, are they real, or did you get, surgery for that? And what those of us in cisgender land need to understand that these are completely inappropriate questions. You don't sit down with a date and start asking people, did you have braces, or did you have, penis enhancement surgery or anything like that if you're assuming that you're both cisgender. So don't ask questions that you wouldn't ask to just anyone. Just because a person is trans doesn't give you license to ask inappropriate personal questions. And I do want to just kind of, as I'm thinking about this isn't really one of my bulleted points, but because I'm cisgender, I just want to point out that my talking to a transgender person about their sexuality, like there's limitations there. And if I would have been ideal about this setting, I would have asked a transgender therapist or somebody with experience to also join us for this conversation. So I'm aware of that. This isn't the ideal setting. I'm bringing my clinical expertise as a certified sex therapist, but I'm greatly lacking as far as obviously any personal experience with this issue. And I just want to note that because I think that's important and validating to trans folks as well. A big issue in the trans community is what and when to disclose information. Now, again, if the world was a fair place, the onus wouldn't be on the transgender person to disclose, because if you understand transgender issues, it's, well, I hate to even use the word issue because that's exactly the point. It's not an issue, it's an identity. And so you don't have to explain, as a cisgender person, I don't have to explain to a partner, by the way, you might come across some, boobs if you decide to feel me up, right? Because I'm assigned, a female at birth. Or by the way, my vagina looks a certain way, right? Or by the way, I have certain things that you need to be aware of. It just that wouldn't be part of what I would have to disclose. And what, at the same time, because we live in the culture that we do, disclosure becomes a really big thing. Because on the one hand, your gender identity is just one aspect of yourself. If you're on a dating site, for example, you want to tell people, I like to ski, I like to read, I'm interested in these, travel, I'm interested in this is what my personality is like. You're not necessarily telling people this is my body type, or this is exactly what you're up against as far as my sexual ways of touching people, or those are things that you kind of expect to find out as you're dating, as you go along the way. So if you're a trans person, that puts you in a really difficult spot, because on the one hand, you don't want that to be the defining factor. And so many people will focus on that and just like write you off from the get-go if that's what you're disclosing. On the other hand, if you don't disclose that information, that can put you in a position where somebody might be really upset with you and say, well, you weren't honest with me, and they can feel betrayed, even though, again, I'm not sure that that's what should be happening, but that's what happens. And then the risk for violence actually increases if somebody that you're with isn't expecting to run into that issue. And it can be really scary. So these are really complicated things that people are having to just manage and handle on a regular basis just when they're trying to date. So we're going to talk maybe a little bit about when the best times are to disclose, which I don't really have a best answer to that. I think that's a really individual kind of thing. I guess my only thought about it is that, it might be a good idea to disclose before you get comfortable kissing or having any type of sexual encounter with somebody, mainly from that perspective of your own safety. And if somebody is going to turn you away for that, maybe it's better to know that earlier than later anyway, because who wants to hang out with somebody who's going to be discriminatory against you for those reasons? All right, then well, not my last point, my next to last point is that oftentimes when you're dating people as a transgender person, you may run into what I call two classic types of objectification. One is kind of the fetishizing type, which is like, ooh, I'm into that. So instead of really being into you as a person, they're into the idea that they're dating or having sex with a transgender person. So they're, in a sense, fetishizing this aspect about you instead of being with you. Now, we do this on all kinds of other issues as well. We do this on body type and breast size and all kinds of reasons why people might be interested in having a sexual experience with a person, but it is still an objectifying reason. The other way people objectify is what I call finding an exception to the rule. So in other words, I'm not normally into that, which, that's horrible language that a lot of people use, but you seem nice, so I might be willing to try it with you. So still not super great, right? Like, that's not something I'm really into, but I might find the exception, and will, pat me on the back because I'm willing to do that. So again, just really diminishing to the person who's in the trans position. Now, so when we finally get to the last point, which is how do we finally get to the point of being sexual and enjoying your sexuality with somebody as a transgender person, I'm really much more interested in hearing from our guest and seeing what questions she particularly has. But like a lot of sexuality, I'm sure I'm going to focus on mindfulness, on being cognizant of your own either anxieties or pleasures, being, aware of the principles of sexual health, which we've talked about a lot on this show, which one of them includes mutual pleasure. And then it just, knowing that anything new, anything that you're not used to yet is going to take just an adjustment period and a transition time where hopefully there's a lot of self-compassion and those learning opportunities, right? So not that I did something bad or wrong or awful. It's like, oh, well, I learned I don't want to do that again. Or, that really worked out well. I'd like to repeat that. Or, so kind of taking an exploratory, self-compassionate journey with yourself. But I think we're going to get more into detail with the questions. So Ashley, do you want to bring on our guest?
Yes, so I'm going to bring on Linda, and just as a reminder for those on Facebook, we'll go for another about 5-10 minutes, and then we're going to go ahead and cut the feed on Facebook. And so if you want to finish watching with us, go ahead and start heading over to patreon.com/Sex Talk with Natasha, and there you can become a subscriber. So now, without further ado, welcome, Linda.
How are you?
Hi, Linda.
Good.
Welcome to our show. So
Or
nice to see you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Why don't you go ahead and just give us a little bit of an introduction of who you are and what you're about?
Okay, I'm a 69-year-old transgender woman. I came out in September of last year at the age of 68.
Wow.
Retired Air Force officer. I was married for 45 years, but after I came out, my wife decided that she did not want to be with me anymore or couldn't be with me anymore. So I'm suddenly single. 2 out of 3 of my children are not talking to me. 5 out of 6 of my siblings are very opposed to what I'm doing. They think it's very sinful. But now that I'm divorced, I don't want to spend the rest of my life alone. How do I find a partner, and how do I find pleasure, and how do they find pleasure? Because I think that's still an important part of my life.
Yeah. Gosh, thank you for sharing all that. That is actually not an atypical presentation. Of course, it's much harder for people to obviously come out later in life. Do you want to talk a little bit about just what that was like? Because it sounds like a lot of people are seeing this as a choice, right? Like you're making this choice to do this and uncomfortable with the ramifications, when in reality, I'm guessing you've had to live an entire lifetime being very isolated and alone in certain aspects of yourself.
Oh, it was very hard. Growing up, there was no internet. There was no place to go. My parents were not understanding at all. I couldn't talk to them about it. You couldn't talk to any friends. The church was opposed to it. Who'd you go to? And I thought I was the only boy in the world who wanted to be a girl. And it was very hard to come to terms with that. And then the church's teachings against homosexuality and all that made it very difficult. And between the culture, the religion, the cultural expectations of the religion, the cultural expectations of society, also being in the military, wanting to keep my family together, wanting to please my wife, it was very difficult.
Mm-hmm. What religion did you grow up in?
I'm LDS, I'm Mormon.
Okay. All right. So part of obviously your journey, just to get some clarification, and I am asking these questions more from a clinical standpoint, not because I'm dating you. Because if I was dating you, these would not be appropriate questions. But so it sounds like, I mean, you were married to a female, and was that an orientation that you were comfortable with, even though you were not comfortable with your gender identity? Because people confuse these things a lot, right? They're two very different things. So, because it sounds like you're saying you're interested in dating women. So is your sexual orientation attracted towards women?
Correct.
Okay, so do you currently see yourself as a lesbian? Is that how you identify?
Well, that's a good question. How do you identify lesbian or homosexual in a case like mine? I've asked that of my church leaders. So I'm legally female now. I have changed my gender. So I guess from a legal standpoint, if I were to find somebody to get married, that would be a lesbian marriage.
Right. Well, so that's a good question, because really the best answer to that is who the hell cares, right? So
Exactly.
the way you want it.
I asked that question I presented at a psychology class a couple of weeks ago, and I presented that conundrum to them, and I said, what do you think? And they gave some answers, and I said, in the end, the best answer is, who cares?
Yes, that's exactly right. Who cares? At the same time, we do have these terms for different reasons, right? To help us organize data or organize ourselves or organize our own identities. And so for some people, it can be helpful to have labels and to have definitions. And so what I would say about the homosexual label is that if you're attracted to somebody of your same gender, then that would put you in that category, right, of homosexual, gay, lesbian, etc. So if you have a gender identity of a woman and then you're attracted to women, that would put you officially in that category. Although if you're not comfortable with that and that's not helpful to you, then I would encourage you to really use any labels that are, or not use any labels at all.
Yeah, I actually, my thinking is in trying to find somebody to date and stuff, my best bet is to identify as lesbian, because that's more likely where I'll find somebody who would be approving.
Right, right. Okay. So then another thing that I'm just going to ask again from a clinical perspective is, have you had any sex reassignment surgeries to match your anatomy to your gender identity? And because and the reason I ask this is because this is going to probably play a factor in how you present yourself in your dating world.
As of this moment, no.
Okay.
I am taking hormones, however.
Okay. All right. So, and that's a whole nother thing that I just want to throw out there to people, just as far as an education, is that there are people all over the spectrum on how they feel about sex reassignment surgery. So some people are like, I definitely want my anatomy to match my psychology gender identity. There's other people who are like, I don't. I do identify as a woman, but I don't want to mess with my anatomy. My anatomy is fine. I don't want to deal with surgeries, the complications of surgeries, etc. There are other people who want the surgeries, but the reality is they can't afford them or don't have access to them. We just live in a world where most insurance companies still don't cover these types of surgeries, and they can be extremely expensive. And so it's just sometimes people who have these surgeries just kind of are more socioeconomically privileged, if that makes sense. So there's all kinds of things. So tell me a little bit.
Just so you know, sex reassignment surgery is $25,000 to $50,000.
That's right. That's right. It's incredibly painful, and it's incredibly intrusive. And there can be complications, of course, like with any surgery. And so, so we as sex therapists are encouraging people to be, to find comfort and pleasure with whatever decision they make in that regard. There's no right or wrong way to face those types of issues. And at the same time, I know that for a lot of people, the whole, what's kind of the lingo, it's like how well do you pass, right? That's kind of awful lingo. So in other words, how feminine or masculine do you really look? Can people tell that you're transgender or not? Like, these are really awful things that again get us into that either or category. And unfortunately, just with age and all kinds of things, it can be harder to, you know, change certain attributes of your physical appearance the older you are when you're transition. That's just kind of a reality. So I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, or how that impacts your fears or ideas about dating, or if you're kind of pretty comfortable with it and it doesn't matter much at all for you.
In my case, I feel like I passed pretty well. When I go to the malls and so forth, I don't get a second glance or anybody snickering and this type of thing. I know other transgenders, however, who are very obvious, and it's much harder for them, and I feel very sorry for them in that regard. But fortunately, I'm comfortable in going out, and I don't see much that people reckon. But there's so many little things that you don't think about that does give you away, and we call it being clocked, by the way.
Being what?
So being clocked.
Mm.
So, for example, I met somebody at church, and I didn't think that they realized that I was transgender. But I was later talking to him. I said, "You didn't realize?" Yes, I did. And I said, "Well, how did you know?" Because of your firm handshake.
Mm.
Just little things like that give you away that you don't even think about. Of course, the voice and other things as well.
Right. Yeah, there's women with deep voices and there's men with high voices. So that's sometimes. I think for men, sometimes it's harder with things like an Adam's apple, you know, or things of that nature. They're just more male characteristics. So yeah.
They're often much larger, taller, bigger hands, bigger feet. These type of things can be are very hard to hide.
Right. And why many people, the course of treatment at this point is recommendation of hormone suppression. Now, hormone suppression is different than hormone treatment for younger people. It just means that they'll go through puberty later, because that will give them more time to just not necessarily go through some of those changes while they're making decisions that are very difficult, you know, at a young age. So, all right.
Well, HRT for somebody like myself includes blockers and estrogen.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So I know Ashley's going to butt in. So
I am.
Can you ask one specific question that then we're going to kind of use as the transition to Patreon?
Go ahead.
For you, Linda, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm very much a virgin. I have not had sex woman to woman, and I'm not certain how to do that, particularly being on hormones. I can't get an erection. How do I pleasure a female partner, and how do I find pleasure for myself?
All right. Woo, woo. This is
a great question.
Because this is where it gets fun. And with that, we're going to say goodbye to Facebook. So come on to Patreon and we're going to talk all about this kind of stuff. So thanks for joining us. And we will be back next week, but hopefully come on over to Patreon because we're going to continue this great conversation.
Thanks, Facebook.